Hi, everyone. So I want to talk about um, just more in depth about interactions. We have discussed it a few times in lab, but I want to make a video so that you can just replay some of the details. Um, so I'm going to use this data set because it has a lot of interesting things to talk about. Um, and I'm just going to run this between subjects ANOVA. Okay, so I'm going to take their dependent variable, and I'm going to use self-esteem and meta memory. I'm going to ask for descriptives and effect size. Um, and then I'm going to ask for the interaction effect. That's what's really important. So what we're going to be talking about. So that's through the EM means. And then I'm going to ask for a plot of self-esteem against memory. And I'm going to ask for a bar chart. Okay, so I ran the analysis, and here's the table of descriptives. Here is the F table, and I'm just going to think through it really briefly. So here's our independent variable of self-esteem. It has 1 degrees of freedom, and it has 5.22 F value, and then 0.02 significant. So that's significant, and it has a 0.04 partial eta squared. That's a medium effect size. Then we have meta memory. Also, it has 1 degrees of freedom. We have 12.59 F statistic, and then less than 0.001 significance, p-value. And our partial eta square is 0.09. That is a strong effect size. Then we have our interaction here. We have a 2.88 F statistic and a 0.09 significance. So that's a 0.09 p-value. Now, we have discussed that less than 0.05 is significant, but if it is between 0.05 but less than 0.1, you can consider that marginally significant. And when it's marginally significant, you can also call it approaching significance. And in your discussion, you can discuss it as if it's significant. So this is marginally significant. So I'm going to talk about it as if there's a significant interaction. Okay. And 0.02 is a weak effect size. Okay. So as a weak effect size, like if this study had a bigger participant pool, this would probably end up becoming significant. But effect size is not affected by n size. So the effect would stay weak, but since the study is approaching significance, you would probably see significant results with a bigger sample size. So let's talk about how to talk about significance. Okay, so when you do have a significant interaction, that's when you go to look at this table here where it says pairwise comparisons. Okay, and this does basically does like another t-test. So it's looking at meta memory like low. Like, okay, so if your participants are have low meta memory, then they're looking specifically only at people who have low meta memory. They're looking at their people who have low self-esteem and high self-esteem, but only within low meta memory. That means they are not looking at people who have high meta memory, only people with low meta memory. So only within people with low meta memory, people with low self-esteem, when they're compared Okay, so we're looking at people with low, sorry about that, people with low meta memory, and we're comparing people here with low self-esteem versus people with high self-esteem. Okay, uh, so this top row is saying low self-esteem versus high self-esteem, and then this next row is saying high self-esteem versus low self-esteem. So it's basically the same comparison, just in the opposite direction. All right. So you only need to pay attention to one of them because it's giving you the same information, except, you know, on this it's negative and on this it's positive. So, you know, if it's negative, that means people with high self-esteem have higher scores. Uh, So, and it's showing that it's a statistically significant difference. So people with high self-esteem score significantly higher than people with low self-esteem if they have low meta memory. Okay. And so like low self-esteem has a small total sum score, and high self-esteem has a high score. So a low number minus a high number makes a negative number. So there's that. And then when you look at only people with high meta memory, so we're not looking at people with low meta memory, you can make that same comparison between people with low self-esteem and high self-esteem. So people with low self-esteem minus people with high self-esteem. And as you can still see, people with high self-esteem have higher um, uh, total sum DV. However, it's like small. It's a small difference. It's less than, it's negative, but it's less than one. Whereas up here it was negative and it was like 6.6. And so if you move on to like this, the significance measurement, the significance statistic, that's not significant. So that's really interesting because the interaction is actually telling us that the difference that we find in self-esteem is only significant if you have low meta memory, and it's not significant if you have high meta memory. So that's what your interaction is telling us. This effect of self-esteem on the total sum score, the total sum DV, is affected by low meta memory. And if you have high meta memory, that difference between people with low and high self-esteem actually isn't there. So that's like that's what the interaction tells us. And then you can look deeper into the interaction to see if it works the other way. So like, for example, now instead of looking at only people with low meta memory, we're only looking at people with low self-esteem, and making that comparison between low and high meta memory. And as you can see, without going into super detail again, that's also a significant difference. So people with low self-esteem also show this difference between people with low meta memory and high meta memory, but people with high self-esteem, actually, there's not a significant difference between low and high self-esteem. So there's two ways you can look at that interaction. And then if we look at the graph here, you can see that difference graphically. So here on the bottom we have the self-esteem, right? So on the left side it's low self-esteem, and on the right side it's high self-esteem. And then here in the color-coded part, it's meta memory. So blue is low meta memory, and green is high meta memory. So like you can really tell that there's not a huge difference between the green bars, right? So so if you're looking at green, that's high meta memory, and between low self-esteem and high self-esteem, there's not much of a difference in the green bars, the high meta memory people. But when you look at low meta memory, the blue bars, you can see there's this wide difference between people with low self-esteem and high self-esteem, right? That's that 6-point difference, 6.6 point difference, and this is a 0.9 difference. So you can see that visually, the interaction effect. And when you talk about when you write about the interaction effect, that's what we're talking about when we say when you're saying you examine the means. So if I scroll up again, I'm going to do it depending on self-esteem, right? So I want to talk about it in terms of people with low self-esteem, meta memory, low and highs. That's what makes the difference. So in my writing here, when I say an examination of the means showed that when uh, people with low self-esteem showed that people with low self-esteem who had low meta memory, and then I input the mean, people with low self-esteem and low meta memory, but here it is. So right up here, people with low self-esteem with low meta memory, they had a mean of 40. Example actually mean showed that people with low self-esteem and low meta memory had lower scores than people with low self-esteem, right? So we're sticking with low self-esteem and high memory, high meta memory. And then I'll go ahead and put that means. So low self-esteem, high meta memory is 48.7. 48.7. And, or actually this one sounds more like a but when they had high self-esteem, there was no difference between people with low meta memory. And then I put that mean. And high meta memory. Okay. And then to explain what that means, this means that people, that means that the effect of meta memory is only present in people with low self-esteem. In other words, meta memory is not a significant factor in people with high self-esteem. Okay. So that is how you look at your interaction effects if you do have a significant interaction. And depending on what kind of interaction you have, you just have to word it a little bit differently than other interactions. So it's always going to be specific to your own experiment. Okay.